In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Centrica, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. The best way to predict your future is to create it. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin. Today we're diving into modernizing estate planning, breaking barriers in will creation, and the future of digital legacy. Our guest today is Tim Hewson, co-founder of LegalWills. In 2001, after leaving a corporate career, Tim set out to make will writing simple, accessible, and affordable through an online platform. Since then, LegalWills has expanded across Canada, the US, the UK, and South Africa, helping create over 500,000 wills and more than 1 million estate planning documents. His company has also facilitated nearly $500 million in planned charitable bequests, reshaping how people think about their legacy. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, small review, or even a quick share. Your supports help more people find meaningful contents just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Tim Hewson, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Sam. How are you?
I'm doing absolutely fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. What you're doing and sort of your life story is one that is quite inspiring. So we're very glad to have you. To kick us off, tell us more about LegalWills.
So LegalWills has now been around for 25 years. So we started back in 2000, and it came about because both myself and my co-founder, we both worked in high tech. We had a tradition every week of going out for drinks every Friday after work. One time we went out and there was about 15 people sitting around the table and the subject of wills came up. And somebody said, you know what, I really should have a will. And everybody around the table, we all had jobs, families, houses, everything. And not one single person out of the 15 people around the table had a will. Yet we all knew it was an important document. So back in 2000, it was the time where it was a dot-com boom. People were looking at more convenient, more accessible ways of doing things. And myself and Henry, my co-founder, we said that this is a broken system. There must be a better way of making wills affordable and, most importantly, accessible. It wasn't necessarily the cost of preparing a document, but it was the inconvenience of making an appointment, coordinating that with the spouse, going to the lawyer's office once, twice, 3 times to get it sorted. It was never making it to the top of the to-do list for any of us. So we looked at a way of the original mandate was to just make will writing accessible to everybody. 25 years later, we're still doing it. And it's an interesting stat because everybody needs a will, but 65% of Canadian adults don't have one. And the mess of not having one creates a real problem for loved ones and families. So we're still on our quest to try and get every Canadian to prepare their will.
Beautiful. And just like you said, you had a life in corporate. I'd love for you to bring us back basically to the sort of very beginning of who is Tim Hewson, perhaps. Tell me more about, I suppose you always had an interest for tech. It seemed like to me like you always had an interest for helping people as well. Where does that come from? Tell me more about yourself background-wise.
So I'm from the UK originally, and I graduated from a UK university, Loughborough University, in human factors and software design, like user interface design, not coding, but developing a user interface. So it's all, at the time we were talking about user-centered design. So anything that you build has to have the user experience first and foremost in the design process. And back then, it's developed a lot. It's become really the way of building software now. But back then, it was very much, okay, we've built it. Now let's run it past the user experience guys, make sure it's okay. And then the user experience people were saying, this is so confusing. I don't know what I'm supposed to click on and how I'm supposed to do it. We've got to go back to the drawing board. So the movement back then was, okay, have your user experience guys first talk to the customers about what they're trying to do. Then they build the spec for the product, and then the product fits the user's needs. So that was my first job out of university. I worked for a company that was an adjunct to the university. And then back in 1998, I moved to Canada. I emigrated for a job with Nortel, and that was in the user interface design group in Nortel.
Beautiful. All right, that makes a lot of sense. So you basically obviously started LegalWill 2000 2001 from what I was able to retrieve. Like you said, happy quarter of a century. That's a feat that most companies do not basically accomplish. So congratulations on that. It seems to me that you bootstrap actually basically with personal funds to begin with. Tell me more about how was that, right? You get this great idea, everybody's talking about, and just like this aha moment. Hey, none of us have wills, and we should all have one. Tell me more about the beginning, the infancy, perhaps, of LegalWill.
Yeah, so the first step was to meet with some lawyers to see whether it was possible. And all the lawyers immediately said, no, you've got to meet with a lawyer to write your will. And, obviously they would say that. It's a lucrative revenue stream for them. So eventually we found a lawyer who said, hey, that seems like actually a really good approach, a really good idea, because people who come into my office typically fill out a form in the front office, and then we go back and prepare their will. So if you could automate that process, maybe there's something in this. So Henry, I bought a lot of books on writing a will. I remember actually distinctly a friend of mine coming over and looking at my bookshelf saying, dude, like, you have a lot of books on wills. Like, what's the fascination with wills? And it's like, oh, I've got this project that I'm doing. I'm trying to see if I can systemize everything that's in these books and create software with Henry. Henry was going to build it. And we literally had like cards all over his floor with pieces of string between the cards. It's like, how's this? So somebody's going to come into the service. Where are you located? Are you married? Do you have children? And we had it on his basement floor, this huge flow chart of how this service was going to work. And then we went from there. And I say we went from there. Henry then built it. And the division of labor has forever been Henry builds the code and I do the either user experience and also the business development side.
You're the growth guy. All right, makes sense. So I suppose, obviously, as a bootstrap startups, how did you validated the idea? And outside of obviously consulting with lawyer and making sure that it was basically just possible at all, and gain traction in such a traditional and sensible basically industry like estate planning.
So with a bootstrap method, so what we did was we both put in $2,000. That was our starting cash injection. And to be fair, I mean, we had our jobs at Nortel, but we knew. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Nortel.
Yes, I am.
Okay, and it's one of those that if you know it, you know it, and if you don't, you don't. But Nortel was a colossal company of 100,000 employees, and it went from 100,000 employees to 0 employees in the space of a year or two. The stock price went from $120 to 10 cents. It was an absolute cataclysmic fall from grace of a company. Well, we were there. We were there at the very, very heights of Nortel. And then we started to see the writing was on the wall, and we needed to build a safety net just in case. So we were doubling. And I remember back then, Henry literally had a switch on his computer where he could switch between his Nortel work and his LegalWills work on his monitor. So he would be coding and then flipping back to his Nortel work and flipping back to his LegalWills work. So it really was like the OG side hustle. So we did that, put in $2,000, and that was really for incorporation and like the bureaucracy that's required at the start. We didn't need to pay salaries, but the lesson for any bootstrap company is get to your first paying customer as soon as you possibly can, because we knew that ultimately we couldn't do any of this land grab market share. We needed to give everything away for free until we got traction. It wasn't going to work for us. We needed to sell a product and get ourselves to revenue producing, and that's ultimately your test of whether your product's going to work or not. You've got to know whether somebody's prepared to buy it and pay you for it. So I know that in our first 12 months of revenue, we made, I think it was something like $4,000, $4,000 to $6,000 in that first year. But we knew we had a thing. People were paying, and there is nothing like building a product. I was living in Toronto at the time, and seeing somebody in Squamish, BC, go on and buy your product. So wow, this is cool. For one, we can hit anybody in the world with this, and secondly, we're serving literally anybody can use this product.
Right. So tell me more about the process of I suppose validating the idea and gaining traction in the first place. I suppose you're telling me a lot about the sort of the infancy when it comes down to revenue and sort of the idea you had and putting on display. What was I suppose after this first year, it seemed like you had this sort of realizations that everybody can basically get this. There's just something special with this. Tell me more about, I suppose, how you're truly basically getting traction with this after the first year. What basically was perhaps the proof in the pudding?
So it really, back then and even today, I think that you've got to advertise. You got to do paid advertising, and we did back then. Like Google AdWords was a thing back in 2000, 2001, and we have a product that's somewhat unique because people are only going to buy a will once. You can't get a repeat customer. You can't get loyalty. Nobody's going to say, well, last year that will was amazing. I'm going to write my will. They can update it, but all we can do is, it's not like Zappos shoes, where I'm going to buy all my shoes from this one company. We're a one and done. And not only that, people are generally not that into wills. They know they have to get it done, but it's not like people are going to follow us or love the brand. I liken it to, like, if I bought a car battery, I've got my car battery. I'm not going to then follow that car battery company on Facebook because they're amazing. It's a utility, and I've got it done.
Yes.
And that's somewhat the same for wills. So it's somewhat unique in the customer acquisition journey and the lifetime value of the customer. But what we were doing was advertising, and then we would later on, I think it dawned on us that we could give people incentives for referring us to friends and family members. So we went down that path, but we did get great word of mouth. So people who used our service loved our service, and they would talk to other people. And we did a demographic look at our customers recently, And one of the amazing things we found for our business is that you could find a small town where a ridiculous proportion of people in that small town used our service because somebody used it and told everybody and told the barber, and the barber told the dentist, and everybody used our service. So word of mouth was a really critical advertising, free advertising vehicle for us.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. I love that. That's quite beautiful. And obviously, in the early 2000s, you face a lot of skepticism basically with this. It's new. It's like you were saying, most lawyers and even most people would never basically think about these routes of doing it, and especially I suppose the security portion of it. I think was probably the sort of the biggest portions where people had their doubts. And I have direct quote on you on this, which I think is lovely, which is people thought we were crazy putting such private and crucial documents online, but we knew it was the future. Um, Tell me more about that. Tell me more about how you overcome basically these biggest challenges and sort of build credibility with basically this product that, like you said, is quite unusual, and a brand that is also quite unusual from a client acquisition process wise.
So there's things that you can do basically in the design of the service. Have a phone number, have an address, have your faces there. You can humanize the experience, but not just a random website that's appeared. And then you can get over time later on, you can start to get social proof. You can get reviews, independent reviews on Google Business and Better Business Bureau, Trustpilot. You can start to get those kind of reviews. That once you're there, and we're there now, we have 5,000 Trustpilot reviews, right? So we don't have to work as hard. Although
Yes.
every time we get a 1 star, it alarms us, but it happens. We do get massively, predominantly positive reviews, but occasionally we do get negative reviews. But early on, that's why it was, the first year's revenue was $4,000, $6,000. And it wasn't so much what we did, but it's what the industry did. So what we found in the next year or two was tax software came online, and it became the de facto way to prepare your taxes. They had to launch and say, you know what, don't go into H&R Block retail store anymore. You can do it all online. And people are like, oh, put my annual salary on, like type it in. But people start to online banking, online tax returns, things like that. That all helps. And then one of the things that really, honestly, one of the things that was a big help for us was competitors coming alongside to say, we're not like crazy because there are other options. It changed the landscape, but other people were then also trying to convincing the world that this was a viable option for writing your will. So when a competitor shows up, initially you're like, oh no, our revenues have halved. It didn't happen because everybody's trying to communicate that same message. And ultimately, our competition is against people who don't have a will. So that's immediately 65% of the population. And all the people who are currently going to lawyers. So that's another 30%. So the online will services, we weren't nibbling out of each other. We were all trying to get that 90% of the people who could come to our services. And so having competition convince the world that we were a credible alternative helped us enormously.
This is very interesting. The way you perceive competitions, I think, is one of the most critical thing in any business, actually. But one thing that is with Legal Wills, again, it was so ahead of its time. Like you said, even before basically online baking, before even people thinking that there was a problem with putting things in. Nowadays, obviously, as we know, it's a Wild West. Everybody puts everything and their mother in there. So it changed dramatically. And I think that's one thing that I always love, as a young ambition entrepreneur myself. When you have something this revolutionary, and you have basically conversation with, let's say, non-techie people or even people around yourself, periods, I suppose, was there some type of even stigmatization in the early 2000s of, I suppose, this idea being not only bigger than possible, but also like you said prior to in this conversation, why are you so basically immersed in wills? And was this sort of this narrative of just thinking it was weird in some strange ways?
Okay, so this touches on how critical it is to not try and do this on your own. So having a business partner that you get on really well with, you trust in the long run. And Henry and I have both worked on this together for 25 years. And anytime that I had a wobble thinking this isn't going to fly, Henry would say, no, this is going to work. And then, you can certainly have your doubts, but knowing that there's somebody there who is, and I say it that way because that happened more than the other way. Henry never seemed to have a doubt.
Okay.
So I never really had to reassure him, but I would have done if I'd needed to. But it was more Henry, because you're always doubting, like, do we have the feature list? Do we do enough in the product? Are we? And you're always wondering, like, how do we 10x this? How do we really grow the business? What's missing? And ultimately, what was missing at that time is market readiness. And we did 10x it, we 100x it. We over time when the market was ready.
Yeah, market readiness is something that is also very interesting. The other thing that I'd love to philosophize with you is that obviously one of the main thing when you're starting anything is sort of how big of a barrier to entry is it within this marketplace, right? That's how you justify a lot of the valuation and so on. Now, for you, which is actually quite basically intuitive if you think about it, but competitors basically was more reaffirming the market readiness than truly being basically opposed to you from a market share standpoint. So that's all in itself collectively basically actually helped accelerate LegalWills and not the opposites, which I think is such a fantastic takeaway of all of this. One thing that amazed me though, Tim, and you'd like to school me on this because I don't even understand how it is possible, is that I knew that basically wills was something a little bit taboo. Anything basically in estate planning typically is, to be honest. But one thing that was very interesting was the global expansion. So you went to Canada and the US and the UK and even South Africa, for example. Now, I thought, and mind you, there are a few Commonwealth countries here, so maybe it's a little bit more similar from a regulation standpoint. But tell me, I suppose there's different lawyers has different ways of doing things in even different states. So I imagine it is the case in different countries. Tell me how difficult it was to not just simply copy paste this model, but to sort of formulate a new one to a certain extent from country to country.
So I'll start with an anecdote. We launched Canada in 2001, and we launched the US in 2003, the UK in 2005. Quebec we did in 2017.
2017.
It was so hard. So yes, there was more similarity between Canada and the US and the UK than there was between Canada and Quebec. Um,
A true
so
destination, a true destinations, as
yeah,
they say.
and it was just completely different. So the so our original plan was we built. Let's put Quebec on one side for a second,
Sure.
but we built Canada, and we felt that we were somewhat established. We had a good model, and obviously anybody who's operating in Canada is going to say, well, let's replicate that in the US, 10 times the market, 10 times the revenue. What could be simpler? And it never happened like that. So we more or less have the exact same product at the exact same pricing in the US and in the UK, and currently our revenues are still 70% Canada.
Okay.
So the theory was that 90% would be coming in from the US, and the US didn't, still to this day has not got the traction that we expected. Compare and you ask me why, and if I knew why, I would be able to fix it. But there are different market dynamics. There are different competitors in different countries. There's different cultural feelings about writing a will in different countries. So it never really happened the expansion never really happened the way we expected it to. And we're still predominantly Canadian. But yeah, we just launched South Africa last year, and that was more a B2B thing. We had a company in South Africa who wanted us to provide a service that could support South Africa. So we did. So we do have B2B. We're B2B first in South Africa. We're a B2C secondary, whereas every other country we're direct to consumer with a B2B support for that direct to consumer.
Yeah, it makes sense. Absolutely. And look, obviously I'm in Quebec famously, and we know how complicated it is from that perspective. And even in our own country, where a little bit of the Gaulois, let's say, has really as asserted Obelix, basically is a very typical example we give to sort of illustrates Quebec within Canada. I
So
suppose.
actually, one last point on that. In the US, we support every US state except Louisiana for the same reason.
All right, so Louisiana is still not made the jump.
That is correct.
Wow, interesting.
And simply because, so the reason why we do Quebec, and it's very difficult. Actually, it's very difficult to assess a market potential, because it's like we have nobody in Quebec using our service because we don't support Quebec. So the investment in creating a brand new service, bilingual service, and a French first service, which means immediately you have two streams, right? So whenever we make a change, or we come out with a new feature, it's got to be bilingual, and culturally bilingual, right? There's a, I think, localization and regionalization. It's like one is like the words, and the other one is so it makes sense culturally as well.
Exactly. The
Um,
tonality, exactly the way of expressing an idea. It's much more than language. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we're doing. I mean, within our service, we have things, not just the wills, but we have a service like a vault that you can upload documents to. We have a life locker inventory of all of your assets, and getting the right words for that bilingually is not straightforward. And so, yeah, it took us a long while, and understanding what's going to be the return on investment for that effort. It's quite easy to say, well, we can do the US. We know what the size of the market is, but going into Quebec, can we do it English only? No, that's not going to fly. So it has to be bilingual. And are we going to see the return on, quite frankly, rebuilding the service from scratch? But the flip side of that is nobody else has done it. So we thought, well, we're going to be the only service there, which then goes back to where we were in 2000. We've got to convince everybody in Quebec that this is a viable option, and they don't have to go and see a notaire, and they can use an online service to do it. So we're kind of back where we were, and we're kind of wishing there were some other people in the market to let everybody know that a notaire is not the only option in Quebec.
Yeah, no, it's like I said, it's such a counterintuitive sort of thought that competitors could be such a great advantage. It's very rare that we see an industry like this one, which makes it very interesting. Actually, I want to talk obviously of the impact that you guys were able to accomplish. So you're now at basically $2 million, 2 million basically documents being created. But I want to talk to you about that first million. Sort of I suppose this pivotal making an impact basically moment. I suppose, how does it make you feel now that with everything that we discussed, this whole basically journey, obviously yourself and your co-founder are still together 25 years in. How does it feel to have been able to help and I suppose shape hundreds of millions of basically people that are able to not only utilize the services but have a favorable impact in their life because of it? I'm really interested from an emotional standpoint where you rely as we speak.
So there's a few ways of looking at that. So there's individual level, and we do hear from people who say, my husband was very sick. We knew he was going to die. He didn't have a will. We couldn't get a will. We needed one. And so we used your service. And as a consequence, everything was great. So thank you for giving us an option at a time where we were really struggling in that moment. So you can look at those individual stories and say that person would have died without a will had it not been for our service, and the family would have been left with a mess. So we don't get those on a daily basis, but they're very gratifying when we get them. I would say, though, what's more important to me and what we've really recently tapped into is one very important part of a will is charitable giving. And
Yes.
when you step through your will, we put a page up and say, before you get into distributing your assets, have you thought about a charity? Just give a charity some money or a small percentage of your estate, 1%, 2%. Just give something back to a social cause, your church, something that's important to you. Because we know that cost of living crisis, on a monthly basis, not everybody can find wiggle room in their monthly expenditure to be as charitable as they would like to be. And so it's a really easy way to give back to an organization to just say 2% of my estate. The rest of your beneficiaries aren't going to notice the 2% gone. And that 2% could be $10,000. It could be a significant amount of money going to a charity. Since putting that one page into our service, which it it was one of those things that kind of annoyed us because it became so obvious to us, and we're like, why didn't we do this before? I think we introduced it in like 10 years ago, so we've gone 10 years without having that page in there, and then we put the page in there, and then we recently looked at a report last year, like $400 million has been pledged to charity from that one page in Canada alone. So there, you think, wow, that isn't, may not see that now, but over the next 5, 10, 20 years, that's $400 million that is going to go to community organizations, hospital foundations, whatever it is, that may well not have happened had we not created our service. So that, we're all, I guess we're all trying to find something meaningful in our work, and that to me is the most meaningful thing that we found in our work.
Yeah, that's quite beautiful. Gandhi as one of my favorite quotes, which is the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, and it's a very powerful one, and I think your story very well illustrate this, which truly warms my heart, and I'm sure warms the heart of a lot of other people as well, which is
Thank you.
lovely. One thing that I want to talk to you a little bit more about, Tim, as well, is you talk about this culture shift, right? We were talking about the early 2000s, the fact that people were more sort of, I suppose, willing to put their information online, even if they were sensible, basically, informations. But another culture shift, basically, that happened in estate plannings from talking to a lot of professionals is the post-COVID era, right? The 2020s, perhaps. And in the fact that the demand for digital estates, basically planning, just surged for the simple fact, obviously, that we all know we were locked down and so on. So perhaps tell me about that. Obviously, I'm sure you saw the impact, maybe even from a revenue standpoint and a demand standpoint. But tell me more about, I suppose, what shift you've seen in I suppose, how the market is now being able to not only accept it, but fully, I suppose, if I suppose, putting themselves in the market in which perhaps they flourish through it in a way that is much more natural now. It's much more, I suppose, not only okay, but makes sense when one person that made a digital will talk about their colleagues or talk about it with other people. Just tell me more about the culture shift and how it impacted everything.
So it did work in our favor, COVID. So if you go back to the start of COVID, where there was a really kind of unknown plague coming out of China, and the early footage that was coming out of China seemed to show people just like keeling over in the street. It was scary, right? And so we had something that was potentially fatal starting to spread around the world, and everything started to get locked down. So those two factors work really well for an online will service. People contemplating their mortality and not being able to get to a lawyer who's closed their doors to prepare themselves for their mortality or their demise. So yeah, people came to an online service like ours, and there was one particular, I think it was the first April of COVID, where things just went bananas. They went crazy for us. Like we had one day where if we'd been like a bricks and mortar store, we would have had people lined up around the corner trying to get through our door. So yes, people came to an online service to write their will for those factors. But a number of things also changed during COVID, and that was actual legislation changes that came in. So one of them was you were allowed to then sign your will remotely by a Zoom call with your witnesses. The laws passed because there was this weird situation where people were trying to write their will but couldn't go within 6 feet of somebody. And their witness had to see them sign it. And so people were like passing it through the letterbox, and it was, so the law had to suddenly change. And the amazing thing about that, what's amazing to me, is that the law around will writing hadn't changed since 1857. Nothing had changed.
Wow.
It was like your will has to be on a piece of paper and signed in ink, and your witnesses have to sign it in ink to make it a legal will. That was state of the art in 1857. It wasn't so much in 2021 and 2022. It didn't make any sense that the proof of your identity is a scrawled ink signature. There's better ways for people to identify themselves now than a scrawled ink signature. And so what happened was there were some legal changes that allowed you to firstly remotely witness it, but the first law changes said, I'm going to sign, you watch me sign, then I'm going to put it in the mail and send it to you, and then you sign it, and then you mail it to the other witness, and they sign it, and then that person then mails it back to me. I'm like, really? Is that the best we've got? And then they said, okay, so how about the law? Some jurisdictions said, we can all sign a copy of the same document and then staple them together. And then that means that you all signed in each other's presence. Still not great. But then some jurisdictions, and in Canada, there's currently one, BC, that allowed for the electronic signing of a document and electronic storage of document. So you can, and we were the first in Canada to allow somebody to, we worked with a Toronto tech company, Syngraphy, who do electronic signatures. So what happens is you create a virtual signing room, your witnesses sign on a signature pad on their phone, and in real time, it appears on the screen, and then that's all collated on a digital document that's then uploaded to a digital vault. that your executor can then access after you've passed away. So that means, that 1857 law, which seemed such a great idea, meant that you would lose your will in a house fire, in a flood, in any natural disaster, the thing's gone. Or what most commonly happens is my dad died, he had a will, but we have no idea where it is.
Yeah.
So what are we supposed to do? You're out of luck. You have to find this piece of paper somewhere and hope that the piece of paper that he wrote in 1962 is still somewhere in the house. So COVID allowed some jump starting of some really slow legislative changes that I think without COVID we wouldn't have seen electronic signing, signatures, and digital storage of wills. And now it's such a better way to do it. And the various law societies who we lucked out. We competed with an industry that's so slow to evolve and so slow to pivot on technologies that we were the first to do electronic signing. I've still never seen a law firm do it.
Yep.
So they don't have the technology to do it. They're still sending faxes to each other. So it worked. We worked in an industry that was quite easy to be technologically ahead of, but the changes in legislation are painful. And we started the company back in 2001 thinking that digital signatures was going to be the thing. And it's been so slow. So we have one province in Canada. We have about 5 states in the US that allow it. And the UK have a working group that are meeting in April to discuss it. The argument against it is it's so easy to forge it. It's so easy to forge an ink signature. It's way harder to forge an electronic signature that comes with IP address tracking,
Yeah.
security traces of who everybody was, where they were. And so it's a much more robust, secure solution than a piece of paper with a scratch signature.
It's actually not even
I'll now
close.
get off my soapbox.
No, exactly. No, but it's actually not even close. And those arguments, obviously, I'm on the other side of the spectrum. I'm a very young gentleman, so I'm a very technologically geared, and now we have a completely remote, basically, team of employees and so on. So I'm on the other side of that questions. But I agree with you. There is this sorts of maybe it's on goodwill or perhaps misunderstanding, but this sort of world where anything that happens in the digital, basically digitally, is some type of unsecure portal that we should all be very afraid of.
Yeah.
Obviously, as you said, specifically with things like blockchain technology and things in which completely make it unique, it's much easier to sign a piece of paper in person and to fake that signature. How many times we see that even in school, right? How many times do we see, oh no, I need a signature for this, and it's your sister signing, or it's something else, basically not your parents.
Yeah.
So we saw that countless time, and I cannot agree with you more. I suppose, obviously, I'm sure that you have the objective of it being sort of within the common law and legislation across Canada. How fast can we see this happen? Just the digital signing aspect of it. Do you have sort of an even imaginative timelines in your mind?
5 years, 10
5 years?
years.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to take time. And you know, while they're doing that, we've moved on to AI, right? So there's another huge, like, we've moved on. So you could go and review and have your working group on electronic signatures, and in 3 years you could talk about the risk of AI in legal will writing, because then eventually you're going to review that, because that's going to be the next huge discussion point.
Yes, and we're going to talk about this certainly. Another thing that is to me very fascinating, and obviously you're one of the best person to ask, basically for the just the sheer amount of data you have at Legal Wheel, is the Have you seen that younger demographics basically not only embrace these services, but also maybe it helps them to have a will younger in their life? Have you seen sort of I suppose, a trajectory where a will now, like you said, that was so cumbersome, that was so difficult to obtain, that now is super easy. You can do it in the comfort of your home. Do you think that will also affect the demographic of people actually obtaining a will much basically younger and being maybe more mindful of it? Tell me about, I suppose, the cultural shift, even from a demographic and generation standpoint.
So there's one critical element that you get with a service like ours that you don't get with a law firm, is that you can update your will very easily using our service. So if you go to a law firm and they're going to charge you $600 or more to write your will, that will could, in theory, be out of date by the time you get home. Like you've put an executor in there, and then you get home and hear that your executor's in hospital. It's like, oh man, I've just appointed them as the executor in my will. Now I've got to go back and change it, and that lawyer's going to charge you for the change. So what people end up doing is they wait until that perfect moment in their life, because they want to only write this thing once. So they're going to say, I'm going to write it after I get married, after I have the children, after I buy the house, after I get my new job, I'm going to write this will when my life is in stasis,
Yes.
because I don't want to have to update it, because it's going to cost me several hundreds of dollars every time. So using our service, we're trying to tell people that, first of all, you don't write your will on your deathbed. That's a bad idea. And you don't have to have everything never change ever again. You can write your will, and you should write your will when you become an adult, and you update it throughout your life as your circumstances change. It's a document, it's a living document that you regularly review and update as your financial and your family situation changes. And indeed, anybody named in the will, anybody that you've named in the will, if their circumstance changes, then you should be updating your will. So it's an education thing, but it's also having that capability of letting people know that you can come back. When you use our service, you create an account for yourself, and we're going to email you once a year, once every couple of years, say, by the way, does your will still reflect your wishes? Because you can log in and update it if something's changed in your life. So having that capability does make it more available to younger people, knowing that it's not a one and done. They can do it now. And we have people saying, we're expecting a child in October. Should we write our will now, or should we wait until October? It's like,
Yes.
write it now, update it in October. And I can promise you one thing: if you have a child in October, you're not going to a lawyer's office in November, because you're going to be kind of busy. So when your kid goes for a nap, just log in, update your will. You've got the child now, so it can be updated, as your circumstances change, almost as your circumstances change.
Extraordinary. So I want to actually practice a little bit of an exercise with you. So let's say that in a perfect timeline, you just said that you should have a will as soon as you're an adult. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, so you believe so. So tell me about, again, we were in a political world now, right? So basically, you are 18-year-old. That's where you become basically an adult here in Canada and even the US as well. So you're 18 years old. You interact with Legal
That's
Will.
actually provincially specific. It's 18 in some provinces, 19 in others.
You see, thank you. So we'll say you're 18 or 19, depending on where you stand. And so you go on Legal Will. You write basically this first will. Tell me more about, and again, talk to me like I'm a 7-year-old and I don't know anything about this topic, which is not close from being the case actually. The Tell me more about what should be in that will. Tell me more basically just how simple the process is to actually have this will, and just go basically through the steps of if we need to change it, how you make that. Tell me more about it from your service perspective.
So the first thing to note is an important one: is you don't list everything you own in your will. Right, so you don't start going around the house and saying, my books and my CDs, my so I'm dating myself, my vinyl collection, my baseball cards, whatever. You don't list everything that you own. What you're primarily doing in your will is you're doing two things. Even as an 18-year-old, you're saying who's going to be responsible for taking care of everything. Name a person to do that. And secondly, who's going to receive everything. Bearing in mind that your will is probably not going to come into effect this week. We hope not. It's going to come into effect sometime in the future. You may update it over time, but it's going to come into effect. Worst case, you could be involved in an accident, a horrific accident. You still need to know who's going to take responsibility for everything and who's going to receive everything that you own. So one interesting thing is people say, I don't own anything. Why would I need a will? So supposing if you're 21 years old and you get hit by a bus, but the bus driver was texting and the bus company was held liable, and your estate sued and the bus company paid $5 million compensation. Who's receiving that $5 million compensation? You're going to determine who's going to receive it in your will. So even if you die young, you can be worth a whole lot more after you've died than you ever were when you were alive.
Yes.
So you've got to say who's going to receive, and even then you're going to say, I want to divide everything between my siblings, or give everything to my parents, or give everything to my Habitat for Humanity or the mission or something. You can do that in your will. I don't want my siblings to get everything. Or the other thing you can do within your will is say, you can actually go through some things and say, there's no point in leaving my signed Fender Stratocaster to my sister. She doesn't play guitar. But my buddy, Billy, he loves that thing. I want to leave the guitar to him and everything else to my sister. So you can actually personalize it and leave certain things to some people, with the remainder going to an individual. So it's thinking about that distribution of your estate, but also who's going to take responsibility. And oftentimes, if you're 18, 19, you're going to say, well, it's my parents, but sometimes your parents may not be living together. So which parent is going to do it? Or you may not want your parents to take care of it. Your parents may be too upset, too grieving.
Right.
And, it can often happen where people will go to a funeral service, and this is like we're really talking kind of worst case scenario, and I don't like the morbidity or this death angle to it, but just having the will in place can protect your loved ones against a lot of confusion, a lot of unsettled feelings, a lot of arguments about what's going to happen, what's a funeral service going to look like, things like that, so you can have your own say in some of those things.
Beautiful. And and I think that's very interesting. And then also, so basically, you got to a point where you wanted to have more than documents. You talked a little bit about this during this interview with the digital vault, right? So it seemed like you basically partner with Debt Tech Innovation. Is that correct?
For the electronic signing, we partnered with a company, but the digital vault, we did it ourselves.
Okay, perfect. So it's actually a feature that you guys were building on top of it. That's fantastic. So is the objective with this digital vault, I suppose, to not only digitalize basically documents, but in many ways creating basically this new path for people to sort of leave their legacy to a certain extent. Tell me more about not only the objective, but where you see that fully heading in 5 to 10 years.
So there's two objectives. So one is to actually leave digital mementos to family members. Yes. So you have digital assets, and that's actually another conversation. Like, digital assets can be things that have value, like monetary value. You could have a digital asset of a blog revenue stream, podcast revenue stream, right? Like who's going to receive that? Your domain names. There are those digital assets. But there are also things like your Facebook account. There are things that need managing. your
Okay.
LinkedIn account, who's going to be taking care of all of those things. There's nothing worse than like congratulate Sally on a 5th year anniversary of working at this company. And like, Sally died last year. So somebody should have closed that account down. I don't want to get that prompt every year to wish them a happy, anniversary on their job. So somebody needs to clear up your digital footprint as well. But there are also digital things like photos, or your blog. Who's going to manage your blog? But you could have Word documents, you could have spreadsheets, things like that you want to make available to people. And those spreadsheets could be a list of user IDs and passwords that are going to be useful to your loved ones who need to manage your estate.
Right.
So that's one element of the vault. But the other target here is for the executor who has the responsibility to gather up your assets. And a generation ago, our parents would have maybe 2 bank accounts with a bank statement that came in the mail every month. So it was fairly easy to wrap up their estate. But now if you oftentimes people will name their spouse as their executor and maybe their adult children as the alternate, or if not adult children, it could be a sibling. How on earth is that sibling going to know the scope of your estate? How are they going to know that you had a Tangerine account, a PayPal, a Party Poker, you name it? You could have,
Crypto, Bitcoin.
yeah, non-fungible tokens. Like, who that went away, didn't it? The NFTs came and went, but those things and the next whatever the next thing is, but certainly, crypto. How's your executive going to know, firstly, how they have them and what they're supposed to do with them? So that's really what the LifeLocker service does, not just with digital assets, but even letting them know that you have $5,000 in a bag at the back of the closet. Let them know that because they may not know that. So that for sure happens. And there was a really interesting stat that came out saying that I think it was like 25% of people have an account, a financial account or a financial asset that their spouse is unaware of. So even your spouse may not know about this. So certainly your alternate executor is almost certainly not going to know about it. When people come to fill out LifeLocker, they say, wow, that was a tedious thing to list all of my assets. It's like, yeah, you were doing it for yourself. Imagine what it's like trying to find all this stuff if it's not yours and you're trying to do it for your brother-in-law. Very difficult task. So that's why we created that service.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic, and I think that's expanding on the vision that you guys have. Like I was saying, not just the digitalization of document, but what if basically our digital footprints, and like you said, Memento, by the way, which is a fantastic movie that I recommend to everybody.
Yes,
Extraordinary. That's also very, very key to all of this. One thing that you touched on slightly, and I want to go deeper into, is certainly AI. Right, AI is not only will revolutionize everything. It is currently revolutionizing everything, and not only in basically the way the efficacy of it, and the privacy of it as well. With sensible information like wills and privacy obviously being absolutely everything. I think it was Marlon Brando, if I'm not mistaken, that was saying that privacy is not something that is basically I'm merely entitled to. It is an absolute prerequisite. I don't recall where he said that, but it is something at the core of a service like yours. I suppose, how does LegalWills, as we speak, not only ensures user privacy, but are continuing basically upon building a system that's going to be basically of absolute importance in quantum computings and I suppose everything that is coming with this revolutionary cybersecurity that we might be able to expect?
That's a huge question. So, firstly, every time I'm asked this question, and it seems like I'm asked a question about AI. Let's say once a month, and what's happened in the month since I last answered the question is it's gone like stratospheric progress since the previous month, and it's moving so fast. I've never, I'm going to say something obvious, but I've never seen an industry change so rapidly as AI is moving, and the number of times I get blown away by the latest thing that is released. It happens so frequently that it's very, very difficult to speak to it. What we have now, it's very difficult to speak to it without it very quickly becoming out of date. So we're first off exploring. We're using AI in certain elements of our service. We do have a chatbot that can answer questions about wills that we've trained it, so it's not like standard chat GPT. We had the benefit of being able to take 20 years of customer support questions and our support tickets and plug it into an AI chatbot. So when people ask questions that we've been asked before, we can answer those questions from the chatbot. But what it can't do right now, as of today, it can't go into somebody's account and see where they might be having difficulty. It can say, oh, you name an executive in section 6 of the service. It's like, well, I did that and it's not working. Then it can't help you.
Yes.
Right. So it can answer, and also it can answer basic questions like, the number of times we're asked, are your wills legal? We're called LegalWills. So the clue is there, but we get asked questions like that regularly. So we want to front end some of those questions. How much does your service cost? We can answer that, and with AI, it doesn't even need AI; it just needs a voice. So we do that. We have a chat bot for doing that, and we're now. I think I can actually step back a little bit, because one of the visions of anybody creating a software as a service company is that somebody comes to your service, they step through it, they buy the product at the end, you get the money, and they leave as a satisfied customer, and you did nothing. That's the vision. That never happens. So our main cost in our product is customer service at this point. And that customer service is partly because we've tried to make our service very approachable, and we're prepared to answer questions that are actually difficult to get answers to, because people are writing their wills. They're generally not familiar with will writing as a process.
Sure.
And trying to get basic questions answered, like, can a beneficiary be one of my witnesses? Or can my spouse be my executor? You try phoning a law firm to ask those basic questions. They're not going to give you that time, and they're not going to answer that question for you. So then you go onto the internet. So what we've done, and a lot of our competitors have done, is we've put a body of information out there in blog articles, in knowledge base articles, and things like that, because we want to make these questions not mysterious. We want people to have basic information about what a will is and what it does. What's the difference between a will and a living will and a power of attorney? Get people familiar with these terms so that they can understand the basics of this new thing that they're unfamiliar with. So that's why we have a lot of support questions. We have a lot of support questions that are nothing to do with our service. There's people like, I'm trying to write my will here. I've got a sheet of paper in front of me. I'm not quite sure where to start. I say, well, that's probably not the best approach. There are services that can help you. But if you're stuck with something like, do I need 2 witnesses? We can answer that question. We will answer that question, even though they're not even our customer. So as a result, we get a lot of support, predominantly people using our service who have questions, but we need to now filter those support questions, and we're filtering those support questions with an AI front end, based both as a text chat and also as a voice auto attendant. We have an AI auto attendant now that that we're working with. That we launched it in January, and quite frankly, now it can still. No, the key point is it can make mistakes, and
Yeah.
and it does make mistakes. And we read the transcripts, we get the transcripts, but when we've even had people, we've been running this for 2 months, and people say, "Can I use your service to write a will?" And the AI chatbot say, "No, we recommend you go and see a lawyer." It's like, we've been training you on like, how could you come up with that? And we're looking through all of our knowledge. How could you even say that? But it does. It randomly goes rogue on us. And thank you for calling. Goodbye. I'm like, ah, okay, that's disappointing. So we know that there's some frailty in what it can do, and your original question was about privacy, and right now we don't use it to go in to any customer accounts. It
Okay.
can't do. It can't process a payment. It can answer questions. Now it will, in the next 12 months, 24 months, it will be able to go in and actually help people. And what I've really seen that's really amazing me at the moment is the natural language dialoguing with an AI. And I don't know if you're familiar with Sesame, um,
Yes.
but that is where you really see it going. And ultimately, what we're going to see in the next 2 years, I'm guessing, is a lawyer that looks like you, that is powered by Sesame, that has our trained chat GPT on the back end, and that's how people will be writing their will. And we want to be a part of that, and it's going to scare people, and we're going to have to, people's perceptions, just as back in 2000 people had to get used to typing personal information into their computer. People will, in 2027, start to get used to chatting with an avatar. And even now, with our auto attendant, people say, "Are you real? Are you a real person?" And it's like, and we tell the auto attendant, tell people you are not a real person. That's a rule. You cannot pass yourself as a real person. And there's some ethical
Yes.
challenges there. We're saying, no, I for the world, I sound like a real person. I'm answering your questions really well, but I'm not real. Just so you know that. And then immediately people say, I want to speak to a live agent. And quite frankly, oftentimes the AI could do a better job than the live agent. But we do allow people to come through to the live agent.
Oh, I actually love this last comment, and that's was I was before I basically go to my last topic. When you're thinking about technology itself, and you again in estate planning and the world of lawyers, the this topic is one that is very polarizing. There's on one side people that say that, hey, this will make everything better because again those AI will be so trained that the basically they will make pretty much no mistakes. And there's a lot of studies actually. I studied psychology a lot with my day job, and the it's proven that actually prompts that are well played and actually answered by AI feel more natural and empathic to normal human beings than an actual normal human beings talking to them, which is quite exceptional. Where does your opinion relies on this sort of question of, will everything be, from your perspective, simply with legal will everything basically become, or I suppose partially better with the help of AI? And what's perhaps your answer to those that might be worried about it?
So right now, our mandate as an organization is we want everybody to have their will. There shouldn't be barriers to writing a will, and that is financial barriers or geographic location barriers. So we need to make it available. If we had our way, the government would make our service free for everybody. We would love that. The federal government says, "Hey, we'll give Legal Wills X amount of dollars a year to make Canadians all prepare their will." Maybe if anybody listens to this podcast and they're working for the federal government, we're totally on board with that, because ultimately we want to make it available to everybody, and AI is going to do that. But where the real challenge is, and it comes back to those early questions you asked me about, how did we establish trust? Because right now there's nothing stopping a company saying, willai.com, here it is, you can write your will using AI, and there's no training behind that. There's no safeguards behind that. There's nothing stopping somebody doing that right now. So there needs to be something, whether it's government control. I hate to say government control, but there needs to be some safeguards to have guardrails in place, so that somebody cannot pass off an AI avatar as a will writing lawyer. But in the same way, again, our journey back from 2000 is where people had will kits on a piece of paper, and anybody could say, download this PDF to write your will. It was terrible. It was garbage, but people used it to write their will. There were no safeguards back then. There were no guardrails that were stopping people putting up a sheet of paper and calling it a will kit. So yes, I would love to see some level of authorization. Our company is authorized and accredited by the Law Society of Ontario. We have a Law Society of Ontario seal on our homepage. They've reviewed our service. They've given us backing to say that we're a credible option for people to write their will. There's got to be something. I'm all for competition. I'm all for making it. I don't want to create barriers for entry, but wills are important documents. And when we're exploring AI, we're exploring it in a responsible way. We are, like, I'm sure every online service is exploring how we're going to use AI right now. And we're exploring how we can do it in a responsible way. And we need to make sure that we don't get a cowboy AI will writer beating us to be the first to launch because they didn't put in the guardrails and the safeguards that we're putting in.
Love it. I want to finish by the fact that you advocate for open conversations around debt, about planning, about legacy. I want to touch on an anecdote that I had. I communicate very often with lawyers, and I just love law in general. I'm just curious. And the one thing she told me, I think is perfectly fitting for this conversation. She said, "You know what, Sam?" And this is not a direct quote, obviously, but something I recall from the conversations. Talking about that doesn't make it happen, but not talking about it leave a mess behind. And I think that's obviously what you're achieving, is that's a core principle of this, I suppose, quote in itself. Um, I'd love to ask you very direct questions. Would obviously was a lovely conversation. What's your message for people that are still avoiding basically the conversation about wills and about debts? What's your message to them to perhaps move them in their decision making abilities concerning not only the importance but also well, maybe I'm making it a little bit too poetic, but sort of the beauty behind it if you think about it.
It's a really good question. I've got two answers for that. So on the practical level, one of the key customers who come to us, one of those market segments, are people who have just dealt with a family death of somebody who didn't have a will, like their parent. Their parents just died. They didn't have a will. I am now writing my will because I don't want to put my family through what I've just been through. So understanding what that mess looks like, really prompts people to prepare it for themselves. So what we found every year is January is always our biggest month of the year. Partly New Year's resolutions. I'm finally going to get it done. This year is the year I'm going to write my will. So first and second week of January is always our busiest. But I feel that a lot of that comes from conversations around the Christmas dinner table where people are talking about, Uncle Ned, I can't believe it. The guy died. He didn't have a will. What a disaster. I'm going to write my will. Or the conversation about, Dad, have you written your will? No, it's obvious what's going to happen. It's not obvious what's going to happen. You're going to be leaving us with a complete mess if you don't do it. Oh, I know you just want my money. It's like, I don't even care. I just want you to write your will so that we know what's going to happen and it's not going to be a complete mess. So on the practical level, it's people understanding what that mess is that prompts people to write their will. But I'm also going to give you one of the highest profile anecdotes, which I feel is a real shame. And it was the story of Aretha Franklin, who died, and she kind of had a will, but she didn't have a will. She had a handwritten will that was stuffed down the side of her sofa, but then somebody found another handwritten will in a bedside table, and then they found another handwritten will. So she wrote these wills, and they were all over the place. So I think they found like 5 different wills, all
Okay.
scratched out on a piece of paper. Bottom line is, she effectively died with no will because nobody could make head or tail out of any of these pieces of paper. She died with an $80 million estate. And that estate, in the last 5 years, has just been whittled away in legal fees. And she missed the opportunity. She missed the opportunity to do a scholarship for young aspiring musicians in Detroit. They found Aretha Franklin Foundation, all her memorabilia that could have been given to organizations and to charities. See, it was like the biggest waste. And it blows my mind that nobody said, hey, Aretha, you should probably get around to writing your will in a formal way. But your estate doesn't have to be $80 million for it to make a difference. You can sponsor an animal in the zoo. You can do whatever is important to you. And it can be $500, it can be $1,000. But by not writing a will, the one thing that doesn't happen is nothing goes to charity. There's a good chance most of what you've worked for over time is going to be going in legal fees. So, it's a story really of writing your will is, 1, understanding that mess, and 2, understanding the missed opportunity of either giving things that are important to you to the people who appreciate those things, the person who really admires your painting above the fireplace, give it to the person who admires it, and do something of social benefit to your community. You can do that in your will as well. So it's a missed opportunity by not writing it.
Extraordinary. Mr. Tim Hewson, thank you so much for being on a meaningful podcast. I just love how open you are, and this is a conversation that needs to occur not only in the digital age, but at any age. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I would love if you can share some last words of wisdom with our audience, please.
Well, thank you, Sam. I really have enjoyed it. And I know everybody says that, but I really, from my heart, have really enjoyed this conversation because I think you've touched on a few things, not just the business journey. And, I hope that, people can understand that when you start a business, we started this business not with a view to exiting and getting out of it. It was never our plan to sell it off to an investor or get investor funding or anything like that. We wanted this business to be something that we journeyed with and journeyed with for a long time. So I appreciate you talking about, the business journey. And I never, at the start of it, I was never into wills. It was never something that I thought I would spend as you pointedly said, a quarter of a century, working on. But I have over time really appreciated the importance of it and the missed opportunity of not having it. So I really appreciate you talking not just about the business journey, but also about the importance of the will as a document, and what we're trying to do to kind of change the dialogue around will writing. So thank you for spending your time and asking such great questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.